Secretary Shultz, you mentioned the coming changes from artificial intelligence, from additive manufacturing, and another rapidly changing part of our world, as you know, is the energy field. And you've been a strong voice for American leadership, for a conservative voice for addressing climate and energy. But at the moment, we find ourselves in a position where the White House has obviously pulled back from the Paris Accord. They are implementing protectionist policies with regard to clean energy deployment in our country. So I'm curious your thoughts on what you believe America's posture with regard to climate leadership in the world and implementation of a clean energy strategy should look like.
Well, just as we have a threat throughout the world from nuclear weapons, we have a threat that's global from the warming climate. The paper by Lucy Shapiro that I read from shows on the biological side some of those threats, but there are many others. I think there are two things that should be done that will help a lot. Number one, a lot of people object to all these regulations, the government telling you do this, don't do that, and so forth. Say, all right, let's get rid of all that. Let's put in place a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Put a price out there and let the market decide. So in the program that I've been working on with Tom Stevenson, who's here, we would start with a $40 a ton tax and make it revenue neutral. So you'd pass the money back to, let's say, everybody who has a Social Security number. So they would make it a progressive tax, and it wouldn't have any fiscal drag, and it would sort out people, get them the incentives they need to go for things that are low in carbon. The other thing that I think is very important is to maintain a respectable government program supporting energy R&D. And it doesn't have to be huge, because I know I'm the chairman of MIT's Energy Advisory Board. They have a big program at MIT, and I have more or less the same role at Stanford. And so I listen to what these guys are doing. And the R&D is dramatic. It is now, as a result of the R&D, our solar costs are way down. I mean, say fracking was a result of R&D, and this can be very productive. So we want to keep that going. And we have been working at it at these two universities. A while ago, we had an exchange. We brought a bunch of, like 12 MIT scientists to Stanford, and we had about the same number. We had 2 days of talk about what we call game changers. And we went to MIT, and we did the same thing. Then we came to Washington, and John Boehner, who was then Speaker, set us up with the Republicans on the House Energy Committee. These are supposed to be the bad guys. Well, it turned out that selling them energy R&D was a piece of cake. Somebody said, well, then here's a great idea. Let's have the government go into business and exploit it. You lost everybody, including me. So let's have the government stay out of the business but support the energy R&D. And I think that has broad support. And there are things that are on the cusp right now that are very important. Of course, the Holy Grail is to get to a large-scale storage of electricity. If you can do that, not only do you have an impact on solar and wind and the intermittency problem, but you also have some security, because our grid is so vulnerable to attack. If we have some storage to rely on, that would be good. But anyway, the R&D is very important, and you pair R&D with a revenue-neutral carbon tax, and I think you have the kind of program that'll work.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. My next question is for any of you to address. I'm just really concerned about some of the statistics we're seeing out of the State Department right now in terms of being able to attract talent and losing folks from that pool at rates we just haven't seen before. You know, are just attracting people for entry-level positions is we're at about a quarter of what we were a couple of years ago. There are problems with the seasoned pool as well. What should we be doing to address that?
I'll give it a go, Senator. The A100 classes, the entry classes that we have at the State Department. And yes, they're down. People read the papers, they hear the news, they think they're not particularly welcome. But the real impact of this, of what's going on now, will really be felt in about 15 years. As Deputy Secretary, I had to chair the D Committee. The D Committee makes the decisions on who we're going to put forward as ambassadors to different posts. And I was having trouble toward the end of my tenure as Deputy Secretary because of a previous slowdown in the accession to the State Department, the A100 class. We just didn't have sufficient number of head and shoulders diplomats that I felt comfortable putting into leadership positions. So we've got to turn around the attitude, and I think that attitude needs to start with our president and stop talking about deep state and taking ownership of everything. Anyone who served in the military, Senator Reid will tell you this, we learned everything we ever needed to know in the first general order, which cautions young sentries to take charge of all this post and all government property in sight and stand this post till properly relieved. That's all you need to know. And that's the position I think our president has to take and our Secretary of State have to take.
I'd like to say a word not only on behalf of the Foreign Service, but the career people generally. In 1969, I became Secretary of Labor, and I was told that it was an impossible job for a Republican because the Labor Department staff was a wholly owned subsidiary of the AFL-CIO. We brought in a really top-notch bunch of people, and the bureaucracy knocked themselves out for us. We made friends with George Meany, but still, they're there to serve. I found the same thing when I was director of OMB, same thing in the Treasury, same thing in the State Department. The Foreign Service people are able, they're trained, they're experienced, they've been worked with, particularly by the director of the Foreign Service, to move them around to get the right kind of experience, and they are invaluable. And I agree particularly with Rich's point, the future is the new people. And it takes time to bring them in, to train them, to give them experiences. You can't learn from just reading something. You've got to have experience. Move around and learn things from that. So it's essential.
I'd like to make a point here. I agree what George Shultz has said about the quality of the Foreign Service, and also what my other colleague has said about the impact of current decisions 10 years down the road. But I do think the State Department needs a combination of reorganization and rethinking in one respect. The military are used to dealing with strategy because they have to have an ultimate objective. And so the Pentagon is organized to make decisions in a conceptual framework. The State Department is more organized to have conversations. The various officials, the Foreign Service officers, in their experience abroad, much of the time have to deal with immediate current problems. And so they have a tendency to look for the immediate solution and not so much for the strategic outcome. Of course, there are great exceptions in this. So I would think a reorganization of the State Department that leads more systematically to strategic thinking and less preoccupation with the very immediate problem would be highly desirable. And it's no reflection on the people that are in there now. That has to do with the nature of foreign policy as it has evolved.
Wouldn't that mean, Henry, to do everything you can to improve the stature of the policy planning staff? That is, they're supposed to be people thinking strategically with the Secretary. And over the years, there have been some outstanding times of that, some not so good, but that's a key ingredient.
Well, I try to solve the problem to some extent by making sure that every action decision also went through the policy planning staff so that the department understood this. But I think also in the training of the Foreign Service officers and in the issues which they are asked to address, there is some more systematic opportunity to deal with grand strategy in addition to what they already do well, which is the day-to-day management of things.
I'm afraid, Mr. Chair, we could use some lessons in short-term versus long-term strategy as well.